Welcome to Ruumi's Guide to Grazing Management. This guide provides tips and tricks to improve profitability and resilience. In this video, we're discussing water. Water is really important for all types of animals, whether they're lactating, such as cows with calves or ewes with lambs or milking cows, or it's dry stock, maybe growing heifers, finishing steers or weaned lambs. Water is incredibly important to those animals, and as we start to look to introduce subdivisions to the farms, we look to split up our larger fields and to make them smaller and to create paddocks, then we need to think about access to water. Equally, it may be that we're not introducing subdivision, but simply we're putting more of our animals together to create larger groups of animals, and they're going to be drinking from our existing troughs and using our existing water network. What we can do to help us out is we can calculate the water demand of our animals, how much animals need to drink per day. We can turn that into a flow rate, and we go around our farm, we can measure our flow rates, our existing flow rates, to see have we got enough water in this field for the number of animals we intend to run as a group. So how do we work out how much water we need? Well, it's relatively simple. We can use a percentage, and that percentage can apply for lactating animals with dry stock. So for lactating animals, the percentage we need is 15%. And for dry stock, it's 12%. Now that percentage is a percentage of the animal's body weight that they can consume in litres per day. So let's run through an example that will make sense. So if I have a cow, and she's got a calf, then if a cow and a calf or a ewe with a lamb, we can consider as one item up until weaning. And when I say up until weaning, I mean until the calves are around 200 days of age, or the lambs around 100 days of age. So for lactating animals with their young at foot, then we'll just consider the cow as the entity we need to worry about in terms of water consumption for this stage. So the cow's lactating, clearly, because she's got a calf with her, so we can use 15%. So the way we use it is we consider what's the average weight of a cow in that group. So let's say, for instance, the average cow is 650 kilos. In weight, we times 650 by the 15%, and that works out to be roughly 100 litres. So that's 100 litres of water per day per cow. So if we had maybe a group of 40 cows, then we would times 100 litres by 40, and that would give us 4,000 litres for that group. 4,000 litres per day. Okay, so that's the total amount of water. That's the equivalent to 4 IBCs of water. That's a significant amount of water. And now the percentages we're using, 15 and 12, they calculate the maximum intake. So this is what we perceive to be the hottest day of the year, the water that animals are likely to take. Now, if we're designing water systems, we always try and design to the maximum, because when we do get that hot day, then if we haven't got enough water, it's particularly stressful. So it's possible to get away with flow rates and with amounts of water less than the maximum, but only if we're aware that we're not designing to where we could be in a hot time. Now, 4,000 litres a day is useful, but animals consume that differently, and they consume it differently depending on how they're grazing and what kind of grazing system they're in. If they're in a kind of paddock system where animals are moving regularly, the area they're grazing is generally a bit smaller, so they're generally in 1 or 2, maybe 3 or 4 hectares. So animals are located generally closer to the trough than might be the situation where perhaps they're sort of ranching a larger block and they've got access to 4 fields and there's a trough in just one of those fields. When animals are grazing in a paddock or in a smaller field, a smaller area, they tend to drink as individuals. So what we need to design for is we need to design for like a consistent flow rate, and we know that animals tend to drink over a period of about 7 hours. So what it means is we can divide that 4,000 litres by 7 hours, and then we can divide it again by 60 minutes in those hours, in that hour. And if we divide that twice, what we're left with is a flow rate in litres per minute, and that number works out to be roughly 10 litres per minute. So that's the flow rate, that's the amount of water per minute we need to a trough in order to satisfy the peak demand for that group of stock. So that number is really useful because maybe at the moment I've got 2 groups of 20 cows and I'm thinking, can I put them together and graze them as a group? And the answer is yes, you can if you've got enough water. So now I know I need 10 litres a minute. I could go to the trough in that field, and ideally I would disconnect the pipe from the trough, and I would, with a stopwatch, measure the flow rate over a minute into a bucket or container to work out what flow rate I had. It may also be that maybe I've got a field and the trough's in one corner as they tend to be, and what I'd really like to do is actually divide that field into some paddocks, and I'd like to move that trough or introduce a new trough towards the middle of that field. If that middle of that field is maybe uphill, it's really worth checking that I have enough flow rate here that I'm likely to be able to get the same amount of water over here if I'm going to extend the pipe. So it's a really useful check. It's a useful check to prevent problems, to ensure animals have enough water, which is both really critical and absolutely vital for their welfare, but also important for them to perform at their best and for you to make the most out of your pasture.
Improve your soil health and increase your farm's productivity. Get started with ruumi today by clicking on the link in the description.